My father and I had a special tree. It was our tree. It was a big oak tree that we drive by every day on our way from kindergarten through 8th grade. The drive from West Adams, our home, to my school in Beverly Hills was just a few miles apart, but many worlds different. Every day we'd share a special moment, whether noting the beauty out loud or just calling it out as we passed. My grandfather and I also had a special tree. It was one of those great low climbing trees that sat out in the front yard. He had affixed a water hose to the trunk of it so that you could sit like you were riding a horse on the tree. And I'd sit in that tree and he'd tell me how the world was created. This was one of the stories my ancestors believe. In the beginning, the Creator created half darkness and half light. The people became very cold, and they asked the Creator to only make the world light. They realized their mistake when everything was overgrown. The plants were overgrown. They couldn't get any sleep. So they asked the Creator to change it to only darkness. Loving the people, the Creator obliged. Immediately, they saw that they could not hunt. It was too dark. The plants would not grow, and people started to die. They realized that it was the balance that sustains growth. The Creator gifted them a tree as a reminder for this time, to remember the dark time and their ancestors that passed away. The Cherokee people used the cedar tree as a reminder of this. It reminds us where we come from. It's sacred. My passion for teaching also grew like a tree. I still use trees to remember. To understand how my tree grew, you need to understand the stories that made up the roots, the branches to the sky, and the fruit. No one has ever really asked me why I teach. To be honest, I think it was inevitable. I think that the trees were planted long before I was even born. See, my parents were both public school teachers in inner city LA. They met student teaching at Union Avenue Elementary. But me, I went to private schools. Private preschool, private elementary school, private intermediate, private high school, private university, even private grad school after that. They told me often, of course, how lucky I was, but nobody ever believes their parents when they say things like that. They didn't know at the time, but they had been growing and tending to an educator. By kindergarten, I played school instead of house. I was one of those kids that loved school so much over the summers when my brother would play with me, which was not very often. I would always choose house, and he would not last in my classroom. My mom would bring home her school supplies, and I'd get to use real chalk on a real chalkboard and play with a fancy Apple IIe computer. And I'd play Spellbinder and Reader Rabbit and Oregon Trail, waiting impatiently for school to start again. I was completely shielded from the opportunity gap that was just 20 yards away from my front door. By the time the LA riots started, you could see the smoke from businesses and homes and looting happening straight from my bedroom window. There were people defending their homes and businesses with guns. All of the schools were closed. I didn't know it at the time, but I didn't live in what my elementary school would call a safe neighborhood. These are the roots of why I teach. I teach for home. I teach for Native kids everywhere. My tree grew as I had more and more powerful experiences with educators as I grew up. By 7th grade, my teacher, Miss Croft, she was 7 feet tall, almost literally, but also figuratively. She was smart, she was authentic, she was imposing. She played college basketball, she had these long dreads. She wore elaborate African headdresses every single day. She totally didn't fit in to my Beverly Hills Catholic school, and I loved it. We had such a special bond. The Archdiocese would do a survey of all of the ethnicities of its students in the diocese every single year. And every year, I dreaded it. I knew that I was going to be the only Native American kid in my class every single year. By the time she read off the list of ethnicities, Caucasian, Asian American, African American, Latino, Hispanic, a few hands would go up each time, but only one hand would go up for Native American, and I'd do it slowly, and I felt awkward, and I felt as if I was admitting to some kind of crime. Everyone would stare at me. They'd stare at me as if the reality in front of them didn't match the one sentence about the Indian Wars we had read in our history book. Some kids would even argue with me about not being a real Indian. Ms. Croft was perceptive. She pulled me aside at recess that day, and she told me to be proud. She made me feel worthy. She told me that my difference was acceptable, that it made me belong. The roots were starting to take hold. By high school, Mr. Beckman showed me that my otherness was not just acceptable, but it was what made me special. He shared his authentic self with us. He himself met his partner in the seminary in Mexico City when they were both studying to be priests. They fell in love. It didn't last in the priesthood, obviously, and they moved to Los Angeles to be Catholic school teachers. Mr. Beckman understood the value that authenticity can bring to students and children in a classroom. He taught me to embrace it. Embracing it helped me come into my own as a Native woman, as a Native outside of my Native community, and as someone that grew up outside of the community I was educated in. My tree was maturing and the buds were sprouting. When I was 25 years old, my privilege finally hit me. Like any good millennial, I was taking a self-care day from my cushy corporate job. I was supposed to have that after college, so that's what I did. But fatefully, I decided to watch the documentary Waiting for Superman. Waiting for Superman is all about America's failing public school system and the educational inequity that does exist in our public schools. Less than 1 minute into that documentary, it hit me just how fortunate I was. The opening sequence of the film shows the neighborhood I grew up on. It's literally across the street. It's the 3 failing public schools that I would have gone to. It was like he was telling my story. This would have been my life. These were the schools I would have attended. But I was lucky and I got to grow up in this alternate lucky universe. I was listening that day. I really needed that. It made me think about what would make me happy in life and how I wanted to spend my limited time on this earth. It made me think about which tree I wanted to cultivate and which I wanted to forget. I joined Teach for America in 2013. The best decision I have ever made was to teach 3rd grade at Maili Elementary in Waianae. My proudest accomplishment of my life was my time teaching. It was the most challenging, rewarding, and privileged work I was ever privileged to have. I was gifted with such incredible responsibility, and it was such a joy to be trusted with our greatest community asset. In a classroom, you truly reap what you sow. When you drive down Kulaʻaupuni Street on your way to Maili Elementary, you see a big monkey pod tree. It sits in front of the preschool, and it's the first thing you see as you drive up. This was my special tree. When I saw it, I knew that it was going to be a good day. It was also our special tree in P16. The first day of school would always start the same. It was a time to set expectations, not to make rules. We didn't waste time on that. We did that together. But a time to start planting the seeds of community. We'd start the day where I'd greet everyone by name. We'd introduce ourselves. Then we'd get in a talking circle. I'd tell them about my heritage, my tribe, my family, the importance of the talking circle, why we treat it with reverence and respect. And we'd pass this talking stick that my mother gifted me when I started teaching, and we'd share our gifts, one at a time. After that, we'd walk outside to the monkey pod tree. We'd stand in a circle. And I'd tell them why the monkey pod tree was important. I tell them that the monkey pod tree was important because it enriched the soil with nutrients instead of stripping it away. It provided comfort and shade from the hot Waianae sun. It was truly a giving tree. I also told them that they were planting trees that day and that they needed to water them to make them grow. We'd then go back into the classroom where I had a big monkey pod tree in bright construction paper taking up the biggest wall in the classroom. We could see it every single day, and we used it every single day. Above the top was our big goal for the year, growing into empowered learners. And each of the branches described the 3 ways we'd get there: through empathy, through hard work, and creative problem solving. I told them that they were also growing those branches, and they had to work on them so that they could support the lessons that the monkey pods would hold. Every day, we'd add pods to the tree so that we could watch it grow bigger and stronger. Those students taught me my true role as an educator, that it was to create community so that they could do the important work of learning. If there was no community in that room, no trust, then no learning could happen. I'm no longer in the classroom, but I am still a teacher. At Impact Hub, my goal is to blur the lines between education and business, to make it so that they're branches on the same tree instead of opposites. My tree is still growing, and it still will, because teachers are always learning, always teaching, and always growing. I'll continue to teach because I will continue to teach because Indigenous kids need to know what Indigenous leadership looks like. They need to know that they're special and have value just the way they are. They need to see Indigenous success in Indigenous communities. They need to learn to water their trees and teach others to do the same. They need to see people like them succeeding and growing. My dream for the 163 students that came through P16 at Maili Elementary is that they plant trees in their communities and teach others to do the same. That they care for their own trees and plant more in their homes with their friends, that they share the gifts of empathy, of hard work, of creative problem solving. The benefits of teaching don't die as long as you continue to water the tree. So water the trees that matter to you.